I'm the founder of Product Teacher. Basically, we help startups as well as kind of larger product teams in terms of upskilling folks, teaching kind of fundamentals of product management. So in that way, they can build things that really matter for their customers while also driving the business forward. Previously, I was a principal product manager at Blend, which is basically a fintech platform. Before that, I was a group product manager at Movoto, an online real estate brokerage. So yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Of course, if you are a founder, right, like there's lots and lots of different things that you could be doing for your startup. And so one of the open questions is, well, why should I be taking the time to go speak to other people when I've got all these other things to go do? One of the things that's incredibly powerful about user interview, though, is it helps you understand, is the problem that I'm tackling something that people actually have? I think many times founders have a unique insight into a problem that they've run into before or someone close to them has. But the open question is this market sufficiently large? Is this something that people really want to have kind of more products for? Is it something that they're underserved? And so by speaking with users, we can understand whether there's a sufficiently large customer segment out there, whether that pain is sufficiently deep for them to want to purchase from you. And then you're able to then understand kind of what is the context within their working. So then that way you can put your solution in front of them in a way that makes sense to them. And so one part of user interviews is all about problem validation. And then there's a totally other set of things that user interviews can provide in terms of solution validation. Right? So once you've identified, hey, here's the thing that I want to go tackle as a founder. Here's the problem that I want to go solve. Well, you've probably got some sort of product idea, right? You've probably got something in terms of, hey, this is the thing I want to build. But you want to make sure that people actually want to use it kind of before investing all these resources and time into building it. And so you can very much sit down with users to understand, hey, what are kind of the ways in which the user might solve the problem? Because many times they might have insights that you don't have yet. As well as, is this something that they're willing to pay for? Are they eager to pay for it? And are they running into any issues as they're kind of working through that workflow that you want to be able to build? So really, in terms of user interviews, breaking it down to kind of like problem validation and solution validation, it's an incredibly powerful tool that can help to reap a lot of dividends in terms of saving a lot of time for you to actually go target the right set of users, the right set of problems, and the right solution. So one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to kind of overuse any technique or toolkit that we have. And so there are a couple of things that user interviews are really not quite good for. So one of the things that we definitely don't want to do with user interviews is we don't want to use it to try to get, let's say, quantitative numbers, right? So one of the things that you don't want to do, right, is you don't want to say, oh, well, I think the market segment is this large because I've talked to 10 people, right? Kind of user interviews are really qualitative. And so you get to dive really deep into, hey, kind of here are the kinds of challenges that I am running into, right? But if you're trying to just understand kind of the market broadly, if you're trying to build a business case, if you're trying to identify, well, what do I build next? Those are all things that user interviews aren't really necessarily good for. And also kind of if you are trying to figure out, hey, how are people actually doing things in the real world? Many times user interviews, kind of talking to people, is not necessarily the best way to see kind of how they would interact with your product. A lot of times kind of your in-product analytics is a much better sense of that, right? So really think of user interviews as the why. Like, why are people doing the things that they're doing? Why are they not using our product? Why are they using competitor products, right? And then kind of analytics as the what. What are people doing? And so you can only see, you really want to make sure that you're pairing your user interviews with, if you don't have a product yet, with market research. And if you already have a product, you're pairing that with your in-product analytics for sure. Again, one of the things that we covered earlier is for user interviews, right? Like you're not trying to, hit a set number of user interviews. You're not trying to, get any sort of like quantitative goals. Really, you're trying to qualitatively understand a couple of things with user interviews. So part one is, what is the problem that we're trying to understand, right? Kind of how do we know that we understand, right, kind of the general problem space, and like here are the different ways in which we could attack it. Here are the different kind of customer segments out there, right? We really want to think about, well, what kind of hypothesis are we trying to prove or disprove? And on top of that, the thing that I think is really critically important for thinking about user interviews is identifying, before you've even done them, how would it change your product decision, right? Kind of how does this change the way that you're doing things? I think one of the things that people run into sometimes for kind of more user research oriented founders, but also for the much larger organizations, sometimes what happens is people do user interviews just for the sake of doing user interviews, and they do them, they get all this rich insight, but then they don't do anything with it, right? Kind of they don't build their product any differently. The roadmap is exactly the same as it was before. And so you really want to make sure that you're thinking through, if I go talk to these people, how would that change my product decision, right? Kind of what is the uncertainty that I'm trying to identify? Because if you don't have that, then you probably shouldn't be doing these interviews, right? Kind of if you already have really strong conviction, you have really strong evidence that you know what you're supposed to be doing next. User interviews can be supporting evidence, but it's not really kind of the highest return on investment thing, the most urgent thing they need to go do, right? So you want to think about, how would a user interview change my product decision in terms of who to build for, what problem to solve, or what to build to solve that problem, like kind of those three categories. And by setting these kind of qualitative goals, that way we can then go into designing our user interviews in a way that's going to give us kind of that information that we're looking for.